In this week's In-Ear Insights, let's talk about generative AI, everyone's favorite topic of the day, week, month, year, and, and lead generation. Because I have seen a lot, and I mean a lot of hot to lukewarm to mild takes on LinkedIn and other social networks about how people can use generative AI for lead generation, including some takes that are actually blatantly illegal. I saw one by a fairly well-known personality saying, here's how you can automatically infer someone's email address when they're on your website and then spam them. Like that's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. It's literally illegal. So let's talk about how you can lawfully use generative AI for lead generation. So Katie, when you think about lead generation, particularly in the context of B2B or really any complex sale, what are the things that matter to you as a stakeholder?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think that we use the term lead gen loosely. And so the first thing I always want to do when I'm working with my team is really define what that means. If we set up a piece of gated content and people, fill out the form, that doesn't mean they're leads. They're just contacts and prospects in our database. And so to me, it needs to be more actionable than that. And so when I think about setting up lead gen content, it needs to be, at least from my perspective, something that's more than just, hey, this is the definition of a thing. It needs to be more engaging than that. I feel like the stakes need to be a little bit higher to really sort of gauge interest. It's, I'm speaking in very vague terms, but I know we're going to get into like the details of it. But basically, lead gen content really needs to help you gauge the interest of the person. And so I feel like there's a lot that comes before creating lead gen content. Like you can't just go from 0 to lead gen and have no in between. Like there has to be the awareness stage, there has to be the engagement stage. And then you can, dangle the carrot and say, okay, here's the thing that's going to help me know if you're actually interested in buying. Maybe it's like something for $50, and that's going to tell me, okay, you're willing to spend money with me. Maybe you subscribe to a thing that's going to keep you around longer and you're investing your time with us. But if you put out, a blog post and somebody gives it a thumbs up, that's not lead gen. That's just, passing by, maybe accidentally hitting the button or saying, hey, this is cool. So that's sort of where I start the conversation with lead gen is, how are we gauging interest? And it's more than just, I filled out a form one time and then never came back.
Exactly. And I think it's important to distinguish between demand generation versus lead generation, because what we talk about with things like newsletter subscriptions or downloaded a white paper or something along those lines, that really is demand generation, where you're trying to say, okay, I want to create demand for my products and services, which means I need to make people aware of my services. I need to educate people as to what the problems are that they're probably facing. Like, hey, Google Analytics is going to delete all your data in July. So that is a demand generation thing. We saw that last summer when GA4 became, mandatory. There's a lot of sudden demand, and then from demand you can harvest leads. If you want to, take a sort of a farming analogy to it, if to your point, if there's no demand, there's nothing to harvest. So you can't go straight to lead generation. And a lot of very short-sighted marketers like, yeah, it's all about leads all the time. Well, it's like saying it's all about harvesting your crops all the time. If you didn't grow any, you can't. There's nothing to harvest.
When a few jobs ago, the executive suite was a bit of a mess, and they brought in this outside person to be the CEO when the other first CEO sort of stepped back, which he never really did. He had the inability to let go of any sort of control, but that's a whole story for another time. So they brought in this outside CEO who actually knew about growth and everything. And as a product manager, he said to me, he was like, so what's your lead gen plan? And it was the first time I'd ever heard the term lead gen. And I was like, I don't know. What does that even mean? And looking back, had I known then what I know now, I would have approached it very differently. But basically, because we worked in a very regulated field and our audience, our target customer were substance abuse clinicians, I went and found and created a large database of all of the substance abuse clinicians with their emails and phone numbers and handed it to my sales team and said, here's your lead gen. Now, looking back, like I realized that directionally I was moving in the right way, but the actual thing that I was doing was really just trying to I was still stuck in the awareness stage, because what was going to happen was then my sales team was going to cold pitch all of these people who may or may not have heard of us and had not expressed any interest in doing anything with us. So we were going from zero to sale, and you can probably guess what the results of that were. We got no additional sales from that. But when the CEO said to me, "What are we doing about lead gen?" I honestly had no idea what that meant. And I've learned a lot since then, but it was sort of a missed opportunity to go through those phases to even say, "Well, are you interested in our content? Are you interested in our newsletter? Are you interested in learning more from us? Can you sign up for a webinar?" And sort of bring them through those phases. And so when you're seeing, Chris, people who are using generative AI to create lead gen content or to do lead gen campaigns, you're seeing people doing it wrong, doing it illegally. So what should we be thinking about now that we have a better sense of what true lead generation kind of means?
So here's the first part, and this should be absolutely no surprise to anyone. You kind of need to go through the 5 Ps, right? So what is the purpose? Lead gen is not a purpose. Lead gen is an activity, right? The purpose is presumably sales, right? We need to drive sales, and you should probably have something like a user story to help define your purpose. So as a CEO, I want to generate a pipeline of qualified leads in excess of 200 per quarter of companies that are 5 million in annual revenue or above, so that my sales team can invest their time wisely in closing the most qualified prospects. Like, that's a really solid user story.
Mhm.
If you don't have that, it gets real hard. It gets real hard to do anything else. The next part, and this is the part that marketers in particular really skip over, and I really wish they wouldn't, because if you do it wrong, you're just going to waste your time. Who are your leads?
Mhm.
Right? Who do you want your leads to be? One of the things you can do in generative AI is help you build a profile, right? Who is your ideal customer profile? So you can go into, I'm going to use Gemini, but you can use any language model of your choice and say, today, let's talk about building an ideal customer profile for a B2B consulting company, Trust Insights. This will be used to help our sales and marketing efforts by refining what activities we do and who our audience should be. First, what do you know about B2B marketing and building an ideal customer profile? So what we're doing here is a technique called priming. And essentially, as we've talked about in past episodes, this is going into the long-term memory of the model and pulling the relevant memories, ideas out of it into short-term memory. And so it's going to say, hey, here's what I know about B2B marketing, complex buying process, relationships matters, niche focus, content, thought leadership. An ideal customer profile is a fictionalized representation of the type of company that would derive the most value from your services. It's your perfect fit client. Firmographics, challenges and pain points, decision-making structure, goals and motivations, and why this matters, of course. So this is pretty decent, but I think I want some more detail about what specific data points should be in the ICP. You
And as you're
elaborate.
doing that, it's interesting because we get asked all the time, who's your ideal customer? And the short answer is people with money. But obviously that's not detailed enough, because then how do we know that the right people are coming into our customer database? So you have to go through this exercise first before you can create anything related to lead gen. Who are you targeting? Who cares? What's the so
Exactly.
what?
So industry, company size, location, technology stack, specific business problems, urgency, outcomes they seek, titles and roles, influencers, buying committees, success metrics, competitive concerns. Astonishingly, this looks a lot like the 5 Ps. Weird.
Mhm. Weird how that happens.
Exactly. Budget, growth potential. So this is all of essentially what you would want in an ideal customer profile. Now, here is again where a lot of marketers are going to go completely and totally off the rails. They're going to guess. Say, well, John Wall at Trust Insight, he's our ideal customer, and I think John wants these things. Like, well, if you haven't asked John,
Mm-hmm.
and then you don't actually know. However, there is a way to do that. So let's take John Wall. Say, here is an example of a person who fits our ideal customer profile from their resume CV. Please infer the components of an ideal customer profile from this resume. And we're going to put John's profile in here from his resume.
And I feel like this is where a lot of marketers, myself included, have gotten stuck of, okay, so we know the basic elements of what we want in a ideal customer. How do we go about finding those things? I remember back again, that sort of same time frame that I was talking about with the lead gen. A friend of mine was doing business development for a different company. And I just remember he was always doing research, putting information into a spreadsheet because they had the ideal customer profile. And so his job was to find these people. And so this was obviously pre generative AI. This was, oh gosh, like 2007 maybe. And so there was a lot of limitations. And so he was just spending hours and weeks combing the internet trying to find potential customers that met this, ideal customer profile. And it just like, it was all consuming. It took so much time.
So here we have an ideal customer profile based on John. Industry, companies that benefit from marketing and sales consulting, mid-market and larger enterprises, US based, using tools like Salesforce and CRM systems. Pain points, optimizing sales and marketing alignment, effectively using data, staying on the cutting edge. Decision makers, VP of marketing, chief marketing officer, and so on and so forth. Marketing strategists as influencers. John's goals and focus: increased revenue and growth, competitive advantage, measurable results. Budget, mid-market to large enterprise can likely afford the services. John and his podcast are known for innovation. So this is already a decent ICP. Now, let's add to it. This is great. Great. Now, I'm going to give you the CV of a CEO who fits our ideal customer profile. Katie Robert.
I was going to say, is it me?
It's you. I'd
Yay.
like you to amend and update our ICP based on this data. All right, let's feed this in. Now, instead of having just one perspective, we're going to have another perspective, right? So here's amendments to the initial ICP. Katie add a potential focus on healthcare, right? Problem sensitivity, companies surrounded with ethical issues around data use, prioritizing data literacy, gender diversity, company maturity, focus on outcomes. So now we've got more information here. Okay, let's add in one of those social media influencers who, while occasionally irritating, do have large reach. And we'll put in me.
And so, I think that this is a really interesting exercise because what it's doing is what generative AI is really good at is taking all of this data, finding the commonalities, and then summarizing it for you so that because you can do this manually, but it's definitely going to take you longer just to look at like basically the way that I would have done it, back in 2007 is I would have had all 3 resumes in front of me as a piece of paper, and I would have kept looking at all of them and trying to manually pick out, what are the things that are common here? What are the elements of each of these profiles that match what we're trying to build for the ideal customer profile? And it can be done. It just takes longer. And I do recommend this is a great starting place, but you still need to have that manual human intervention to make sure that generative AI isn't, as you say, Chris, hallucinating and just making things up, that it still aligns with your ideal customer profile. Don't just let the system tell you what that is. You, as the human, have to say, yes, this is what it is, or no, it isn't.
Exactly. So now I told it, hey, summarize everything we've done so far. Build a comprehensive ICP based on all the data in bullet point and outline format. So core firmographics, primary focus, healthcare industries, sensitive data, regulatory needs, secondary focus, technology, retail, businesses with an online presence, mid-market to enterprise, US-based technology. Here's the main problem pain points. Need to move beyond intuition, potential misalignment between teams, ethical data usage, competitive advantage. These are all things that actually are true about the kind of companies we really do want as prospective customers. Values and motivation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this, we are going to copy this. I'm just going to open up a brand new text document, put it in here, trim off the usual, and we're going to call this Trust Insights Ideal Customer Profile. And we're just going to store this here, and we'll trim off these important notes because that's just it talking. Next. Okay, great. We have our target audience well understood. What's the next step in a lead generation program? We're going to just ask it. Okay, we did the homework. We've got that part. What do we do next? Targeted content creation. So this is demand generation. This is not lead generation. So even here, one of the tools is blurring those lines. But lead magnets. Okay, so that's something I can say, okay, well, that's, everyone needs lead magnets, something to attract people, and we need good landing pages. So that's something sensible. So let's focus on lead magnets. Using the ICP we generated, come up with 5 ideas for lead magnets for Trust Insights to develop. As a reminder, because we know context windows are a thing, this is our ICP. And I'm going to paste in the ICP we generated. So we're refreshing its memory, its short-term memory, to say, remember who these people are.
Well, and it's interesting because I feel like, again, lead magnet is one of those terms that's thrown around, but not really well understood. And so you still have to understand the difference between demand gen and lead gen and what a lead magnet really is in order to use a system like Google Gemini or ChatGPT to assist you. Because if you're just letting the systems tell you what it thinks a lead magnet is, it could be leading you down, the wrong road. Like the first thing you said, Chris, is like, well, this is all demand gen, not lead gen. And then it had a tiny little blurb in there about lead magnets. But are they truly lead magnets? And again, that's for you and your company to decide. But you need to make sure you understand what those things are before you go ahead and just let the system make those decisions for you. The other thing that's interesting is that, yes, I have a healthcare background, but it is like tripling down on healthcare as the only industry that we should be going after. And ironically, we do not at this time have any healthcare clients. It's a very regulated industry, tricky to work with, good if you can get it, but also maybe not worth the headache.
Exactly. And to your point, that's where you, the human, have to make decisions and guide it and say, like, let's de-emphasize healthcare because it's a pain in the butt. Or, hey, we don't want to work for, say, a tobacco company, or we don't want to work for a defense contractor. You as the human have to be the one to put guardrails on this stuff. To your point, you can't just let it run around blind. So it gave us some ideas for some ways to do prospect generation, which again, it still falls in the demand generation category. And some of these things are kind of fun, like building a workbook, building a data-driven sales and marketing alignment plan. Like that actually sounds like it would be fun to build. And maybe in another show we will. But to your point, this is not people who are raising their hand saying, I think I want to do business with Trust Insights. What we do know from good old-fashioned analytics is when people are seriously considering wanting to work with us, they visit 3 pages on our website: the homepage, the services page, and the About Us page. Right? And the About Us page in particular, they typically look at, sort of midway through the journey, like, okay, who are these people? So here's what we're going to do. Let's go to Trust Insights team. So here's our team page. And we know from a lead generation perspective, people are going to check this page out because they want to know who we are. Next, I'd like you to inspect the following page. One of the things that Gemini does better than ChatGPT is it can just go straight out on the web and bring in data from the web. So we've talked in the past about retrieval augmented generation, being able to vacuum up data from other sources and use it as a reference. ChatGPT struggles with this, but ChatGPT has document upload, so you can upload PDFs and things. Gemini does not support uploads, but it does go out on the web really well. So we've told to inspect this page, and now let's do this. Great. Using our ICP as a reference, what things could we do with this Teams page to align it better with the concerns and pain points of our ICP? So what I'm doing here is saying we know who our customer is. This fictional example. What could we do with that page? How to modify the Teams page? Short success stories. Katie led data-driven marketing optimization for this company to emphasize specialized expertise, emphasize problem solving, more tailored bios, how we help, how we participate, each of us on a team, testimonials, things like that, and linking to some of our thought leadership. So even just something like that, like having on this page maybe a link to our favorite piece of content. We have get to know, but maybe there's like a signature piece, like Katie, for you, the academic paper that was published in the Journal of Applied Marketing Analytics that you're the lead author on. That should be on here because, like, hey, check out Katie's most recent peer-reviewed publication. So what we're doing from a lead generation perspective is we're saying, here's the ICP, here's some content, make the content align with the ICP.
So ChatGPT, you can upload a document. Could you link to a Google Doc if you made it public for Google Gemini to read, since you can't upload information?
Yes, with an asterisk. You have to use the version of Gemini that has extensions enabled, which is not the Google Workspace versions. You have to use the personal version of Gemini to link to Google Docs, Google Drive, etc.
Okay. The reason I bring that up is because I feel like this is a really good start, but I know that and this is, a more specific example, we've done a lot of work to list the pain points of our ideal customer profile. And I feel like this version, while yes, it was a quick example, the pain points is where I would want to dig deeper because it was kind of glossed over. And so it's saying like, wants to make sense of their data, wants to do this. Yeah, everybody wants, but how do we dig deeper to really understand the pain points? And so like what I would want to do next with this is bring in that document. Yeah, I guess we could just like sort of copy and paste all the information into a prompt, but basically I would want to say like, let's update the ideal customer profile with this very long list of specific pain points, what keeps people up at night, and how do we align our solutions, and then get into what is the lead generation plan that we need to put together. What do we do? Because understandably, this feels very generic. Testimonials, thought leadership. Okay, great. Everybody does that. But that's still not telling me how we're solving people's problems that would that would make them want to come to us and say, you can solve the problem that I'm having. I'm aware that I'm having a problem. To me, that's what good lead gen is missing. Putting a bunch of thought leadership out there to be like, we're so smart, we do this. Like, that's really crappy lead gen. We need to flip it around and put the prospect and the customer first to say, we know that you're having this problem, or let me help you recognize first that you're having this problem. And once you're like, oh my God, I am having this problem, I need to find someone who can help me do the thing. That to me is how I would want to approach for Trust Insights lead gen, because otherwise you're just throwing information at people that's basically going to fall on deaf ears because they're not ready to hear it. So a good lead gen strategy includes putting the customer first, helping them recognize that they have problems, and then leading them to those solutions.
And we're not going to do this on the air for obvious reasons, but
Right.
here's the easy solution for that. easy. It's a lot of work, but it is doable. And you have the data for this. Everyone who's watching or listening to this, you have the data for this. We would take 2 piles. Here are the scopes of work that closed. Here are the scopes of work that did not close. Develop the pain points from each pile. And then why didn't we win the pile that didn't close? How could we change our content to maybe be more clear? Like, yes, we do solve this problem. We do solve this problem. We just didn't explain it well. That information lives within our walls of here's everything that we've closed, or maybe here's the top 10 scopes by billable revenue that closed. Update the ICP, right? Here's the list of clients that we've had in the last 5 years. Update the ICP. One of the things that we say all the time in our keynotes and our talks is that one of the factors that will differentiate your skill with generative AI and the results you get is your data. And we have all this data. We collectively have all this data laying around everywhere. It's on servers and Google Drive and Dropbox, you name it. It's in your CRM. We've got so much of it, and it's just sitting there. That is literally the crops waiting to be harvested. So if we were to just copy and paste, this is not super sophisticated. If you just copy and paste all those documents and glue them all together and say, hey, update my ICP, and just keep going with that, you'll end up with a really robust prompt, right? I did an example for this past weekend with our friend Ashley Foss over at Atlassian. She asked, here's what I want to do with it, generative AI. Is it possible? And I just walked through it. And by the time I was done, it was a 5-page prompt, but it did exactly what she wanted it to do. One of the things we have to get people out of the mindset of with generative AI is, just type a 2-sentence prompt and boom, it's magic's going to happen. No, you have to use all of the data, right? You have the data from the 5 Ps somewhere in your organization. It's up to us, the collective we, to use it well.
It seems like a worthwhile exercise because you're going to have to do it anyway. In order to really understand who your customer is, you have to do that work anyway. So yes, you can use generative AI to help, summarize and, categorize the data, but you still have to you still have to do the research. You still have to look at all that information. You still have to put the plan together. Use generative AI to help you along, but you have to do the work. It's not, you can't just say, hey, generative AI, this is my company. Who's my customer? It doesn't know. It has no idea. It's going to guess. And
exactly.
If you're still at the stage of guessing who your customer is, let us help you do better. So we can help you build these prompts. We can help you figure out, what data do I have? You may not realize how rich the data is that you're sitting on. This is where we say we help you light up dark data. So you can go to trustinsights.ai/AI services, and we can help you with that. We can help you build this robust, ideal customer profile, and then this really strong lead generation strategy. And then you can go conquer the world.
Exactly. Or, even not help you. You just want us to do it. We'll for a reassuringly expensive fee, we will just do it for you. Any final thoughts on lead generation and generative AI, Katie?
Yeah. Lead gen is deeper than just, hey, download this thing. That does not make the person in your contact database a lead. So I just want to let's all just be on the same page about that. Somebody who is in your database is not a lead. They are just a contact. You have to give them a reason to want to buy from you. But that's where you can use generative AI to help you figure out, what do they need? So maybe you figure out who it is, put their LinkedIn profile into generative AI and say, what do you see here? What do you see that I don't see? So there's a lot of things that you can do with it. Don't just say, give me an ideal customer profile. Really do the deep thinking. That's, to your point, Chris, that's what's going to separate the people who are successful with generative AI, is the people who really do the deep thinking.
Exactly. And if you got some examples that you want to share, pop on over to our free Slack group. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you and over 3,000 other marketers are asking and answering each other's questions about AI and analytics every single day. And wherever it is you watch or listen to the show, if there's a channel you'd rather have it on instead, go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, and you can find us on most channels. And while you're on the channel of your choice, please leave us a rating and a review. It does help share the show. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.